Welcome back to our studies in the book of Daniel. To review, Daniel was a bright Jewish boy who, with others, was taken captive when Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian armies conquered the Jewish people in Judah. About 605, these young men are noticed by King Nebuchadnezzar, and a program is set up to make them faithful Babylonians. While Daniel and his friends were not rebellious, hostile, or disrespectful, their deportation into an idolatrous country did not reduce at all the activity of their faith. They maintained the Mosaic dietary restrictions, did not hesitate to pray to God, and their influence was not unnoticed. This segment of the story is one of the most familiar narratives in the Old Testament, reflecting the courage of God's people and the protection God afforded to His people. I'll begin by reading from Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. I'll be doing the readings in segments, and after each segment, there will be some comments. Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent together the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace." Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So now there is this gigantic statue, and with the erection of the statue, the order went out for everyone to bow to worship the golden image. When the music played, people were to fall down and worship. Because of what we know about Daniel and his friends from the first 2 chapters, we are not surprised that they refused to worship the graven image. Babylonians in general would likely have no difficulty worshiping the golden image. They were mostly acknowledged polytheists, and it was a matter of their survival. But for Jews, like Daniel and his friends, who were believers in one God, loyal to the law of Moses, this was not only prohibited, but would be for them disgusting. The penalty for those who didn't worship the golden image was a horrible death. Verses 8 through 18, Daniel chapter 3. Therefore, at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. For if this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. That's Daniel 3, 8 through 18. The accusation was in verse 12, These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Nebuchadnezzar goes into a rage. Ask for the three men to be brought in. They are given another chance to worship the image. They refuse, stating that they place their trust in God for whatever outcome He wills. I'll have more to say about that in a few minutes, but let's move on to verses 19 through 27. 19 through 27, Daniel 3. Then Nebuchadnezzar, filled with rage, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. I'm at verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? They answered and said to the king, True, O king. He answered and said, But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. So the furnace is heated 7 times more than usual. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were cast into the fire, a fire that was so hot just the blast of the furnace killed the soldiers who took the 3 men to the fire. And the king is watching, and 2 things are noted. The fire has no effect on the 3 men, and there is another person in the fire. The next part of the story may seem at first to report a drastic change in the king's attitude. We'll see about that when we come back. I'll read starting at verse 28 in Daniel chapter 3. First, this message. Back in Daniel 3, continuing now at verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and set aside the king's command, and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore, verse 29, Therefore I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruin. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. You know, at the end of Daniel chapter 2 and now at the end of Daniel chapter 3, there seems to be some hope for Nebuchadnezzar. But before we conclude with that affirmation that there is hope arising in this man, we need to just keep reading. And we'll be in chapter 4 next time. There are some lessons I'd like for us to review from the passage we have read, Daniel chapter 3. There is no doubt right on the surface of this narrative that there's an instance of idolatry. I want to talk to you about that for a minute. We may think of worshiping idols as something that was a fixture in ancient times among the Canaanites, Chaldeans, and other cultures way back in the past. Yet, there was ongoing idolatry in New Testament times, leading John to say, keep yourself from idols. 1 John 5:21. Sometime, would you stop and think about the different forms of idolatry in our time? Pleasure, money, religious systems, or leaders who have no authentic basis of authority, and reference passages in the New Testament that warn us against idolatry. 1 John 5:21, Colossians 3:10, 1 Corinthians 10:14, Galatians 5 and verse 20. It has been said the human mind is a factory that can produce unlimited idols. Also, read Isaiah 44 about the foolishness of building idols and then worshiping them. That will be good for you as you reflect on what happened here in Daniel chapter 3. Think about what Peter and John said, we must obey God rather than men. And that's what these 3 friends of Daniel were doing back in the passage we've studied. And they said very firmly, we will not serve your gods. They were very bold about that. So we come back now to the theme of the book of Daniel. And I believe the theme is stated in very clear terms all through the book. The sovereignty of God, in spite of present appearances, God is in control. The specific focus of this chapter is that God's power transcends even death. This stirring story intends to bolster the courage of God's people as they face what seems to be overwhelming odds in our existence here on earth. Thank you